So it's great to welcome today Nicole Cast. Nicole is one of the people who I describe as our hands and feet and heart in various parts of the world. As she works with Catholic Relief Services, she is in Guatemala. And so I've invited Nicole to talk with us today from Guatemala City, where it is nice, not only nice and warm, she says it's hot. Imagine that. Maybe it'll be like that again someday here, we'll see. But to talk about how she got involved with CRS and just international development work in general, and then to talk about what Catholic Relief Services does in Guatemala. So first of all, Nicole, welcome. Tell us, who are you? And why are we talking? I mean, we could talk to anyone from CRS. You have some connections, so tell us about
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Well, thank you, Father Tom, and it's a pleasure and a privilege really to be able to talk to you about CRS and the work that we do. I was raised about a 15 to 20 minute walk from St. Anne's, and I went to St. Anne's for elementary school and always for Mass every Sunday. So St. Anne's is close to my heart. And actually, when I was at St. Anne's and also all through high school, I had not heard of CRS. I'm sure I heard during Sunday Mass during Lent about Rise Bowl, but didn't register as CRS. And I really started learning about CRS when I was in graduate school, when I was studying public health at the University of Minnesota. And I had been interested in development work before that because I lived in Mexico between undergrad and graduate school doing development work with local organizations on my own. And I was interested after graduate school of doing something with a larger organization. I was thinking I'd like to be able to have impact at a different scale than the scale I was reaching with local organizations, which was also wonderful work, but very, very small, very focalized, I guess. And so when I graduated from graduate school, I was looking for different places where I could connect with the mission and also feel like I was doing what I wanted to do and living abroad, because I had always, since living in Mexico, I thought that I wanted to live abroad. So I actually had a series of interviews with all different organizations in DC and Baltimore as I was finishing graduate school, and interviewed staff there. And I tried to go to the offices too to get a sense of what does it feel like? Are people happy? Do people look happy in their culture? Yeah, exactly, the culture. And just to get a sense, if people are happy sitting there in their cubicles or not, and what kind of experience they're having. So I think I interviewed had informational interviews with maybe 15 organizations. And when I found CRS, I just knew immediately, like, this is where I want to be. And not just because I connected with with what CRS does, the kind of work that we do, but I really connected with the mission, the core values, Catholic social teaching, and just felt like it just made so much sense for me to be there with my background and my perspective, I guess, because of my faith also. And so I decided to apply, and I started with CRS as a fellow, which was kind of like an intern in Kenya, and was there for 8 months. Then I moved to South Sudan, and I was there for 1.5 years. And from there I went to Ecuador, was there for a little under 2 years. And here I've been in Guatemala for almost 5 years now. And it's been, this has been by far my longest period, actually, at this point, anywhere. It's now overtaken Mexico in time. And so it has also now become a special place for me.
Are you the country director in Guatemala, Nicole?
I'm not. So we have what we call a country representative, who's the head of all activities in country. Our country representative is my boss. She oversees Guatemala and Mexico. I am the head of programs, so I report to her, and I oversee the programming side of what we do here in Guatemala. And we have a head of operations who oversees everything, all the systems and services that support programs.
Sure. Before we get too far into that, when you were in South Sudan, did you happen to meet a guy named Gabe Hurish, a Maryknoll missioner? He's
You
from
know,
Stevens Point. He's from Stevens Point. That's why I asked.
yeah, no, I don't, I'm trying to think if I ever met with the Maryknoll. I don't think so. There were
Okay.
several mission
Sure, I know.
groups there, and we did meet with some of them, but I don't remember his name. So interesting. Was he there in just recently, I guess?
He's still there. I mean, yes, he's been there for like 7, 8 years, maybe.
Oh, wow. Yeah, we
Probably
would have
a long-
overlapped.
He's
but-
there long term. I mean, that's where.
Wow, that is commitment. It's not
It's
an
a
easy
hard place to be, right?
It's a very hard place. I with a heavy heart have to say it's a very difficult, sad place. You know, I mean, it just makes it's hard on the heart. Yeah, but wow, that's impressive. Mhm.
Sure, it is, and he's an amazing guy, and I need to do one of these with him sometime. I think it's, there's so many complications to life already for the poor guy. I don't want to create another one by having to do find Wi-Fi that's sufficient to do a Zoom conversation and stuff like that. But anyway, we're with you now in Guatemala. So what is your job, and then what does help us understand what CRS does in Guatemala, which is a much different place than like South Sudan, or, I mean, it's not the most desperate of countries,
Right.
but still important contributions for CRS to make there.
Yes. So I'll start with just CRS broadly for those who are less familiar with CRS.
Right.
CRS started in 1943. We're actually celebrating our 80th birthday this year as an institution, and our 60th in Guatemala. And we started as an institution that supported refugees after the Second World War. And so it was originally called War Relief Services, actually. And so our roots are really in humanitarian assistance. And although we've expanded now into many different development sectors, but that remains, I think I would say, at the core of our mission. Humanitarian assistance, emergency response remains part of our key programming, and perhaps where there's the greatest weight of our programming is in food security, or providing food or cash for food to families, and emergency response and other kinds of humanitarian assistance. And
the earthquake recovery in Turkey and Syria being a very current example of
correct. Yes. It's rare, I find, that we don't respond to an emergency. Almost any big emergency that you hear about on the news, we're responding to it in some way. In places where we don't have an office, Turkey, we did have an office, but in places where we don't have an office, we often just fund the local Caritas. And that is because
I think that's important, Nicole, to acknowledge too, that CRS often may not be what's mentioned in the news, but they are working with those organizations that are,
Yes, we are. And actually that is part of our culture, as we talked about earlier, is not to be that visible. So you may hear about other organizations more because their name is on a lot of what they do, and our name is often secondary to our local partner's name on anything that we're on any physical evidence of what we're doing, whether it's a banner or a distribution vehicle, or and then also our publicity. Like it's really our approach is that our local partners take the center stage. So yes, we're always responding to those.
As Jesus says, when you give alms, don't let everybody know what you're doing. Don't let the left hand know what your right hand is doing.
Yes,
I think CRS does get its word out enough. So I mean, they're not bad at tooting their horn, but you're right. That's not what it's about when you're on the ground in the place.
Yes. I think in the U.S. and during, if you heard something, that was a helicopter flying overhead. In the U.S., when there's like Rice Bowl or other events, or when we're working with families to see if they're interested in donating to CRS, then yes, we mentioned CRS directly, of course. But in the field, I think our partners take a larger role. Yes. So I was thinking I had a train of thought, and then I lost it. But anyway, maybe it'll come back to me. So we started with humanitarian response, but we've now moved a lot into, we've moved into development in certain sectors more significantly than during the initial phase of CRS. And that includes education, health, water and sanitation, agriculture, and child protection, youth. I'm seeing if I can get all of our objectives in there. I think that covers most of what we did or what we do. And so we now are a pretty broad organization in line with some of the others, like Save the Children or World Vision, in terms of the scope of the projects that we work on. And we work in over 100 countries. We're part of the Caritas network. That's, I think, what I was going to mention earlier, is that we're part of the Caritas network. So when we work through local partners, they are often, not exclusively, but often Caritas, the local Caritas, whether it's the national Caritas or the diocesan Caritas. And we do that precisely because of Catholic social teaching and subsidiarity, with a belief that people closer to an issue are the best place to respond to it. And among other benefits to working through local partners. But that's increasingly a part of our strategy. And I just was reading recently about some current work that we're doing to try to channel more funding through our local partners. So that's a little bit about CRS. Sure, and the
that's
way.
Great.
Yeah, I think so. I think so too. I mean, the vision really should be that CRS shouldn't exist. Our local partners should be able to implement almost without us, but we're a ways from that being possible at this point. Right. That's our goal. So, sure. Yeah, so we're
what's happening in Guatemala, Nicole?
Yeah, so in Guatemala, we just actually recently rethought about our strategy, our program strategy. So we have 3 big program areas: livelihoods and landscapes, which covers everything related to agriculture, and also landscape restoration, which is basic healing land that's been degraded or misused. We have health and development, which includes education, water, and safe food or healthy food, and then humanitarian response. And so those are our 3 big sectors. And within those 3 sectors, in livelihoods and landscapes, we do a lot of work with small producers. So in Guatemala, there are still many small producers that, when I say small, I mean they have a limited amount of land, or in some cases they don't own land, they rent land, and they still live off what they produce, whether it's through consuming it themselves or selling it. So we work with them because, of course, they're really affected by the impacts of climate change. And in general, I think anybody in Wisconsin would know this, that it's very hard to be a small farmer, regardless of climate change or not. So we work with them to help them with their production, and also connecting to opportunities to sell their produce.
What would their crops be, Nicole? Like maize, coffee, or what would they?
Yes, both of those. Beans, the staple are corn and beans, and then what we call basic grains, corn and beans, and then there are a lot of other crops that are sold, including hibiscus, potato, coffee is a big crop in Guatemala. Probably any coffee drinker would know. There's a lot of good coffee here, and then there's some fruits and vegetables, but they are less sold on the international market, but internally they are. And cardamom, actually, Guatemala is the #1 producer of cardamom.
Really?
As I learned that when I came here.
That's a fun fact.
Yeah. And actually just this week I was in the field visiting a cardamom field, farm, and visiting our producers there. So that's a big part of what we do here. And actually that's maybe, I would say, the component where we have the most diverse programming is in livelihoods and landscapes.
Okay.
And then the second, continue to interrupt me if you have any other questions. The second is in health and education, health and development. And in that we have the first area that I want to mention is healthy food. For that, we have a number of different programs that are, some of them cover various sectors, but we have some programs that are humanitarian assistance, but that include a food component. And in Guatemala, a lot of what we try to do is empower families to make decisions around their own nutrition. And so we use cash as much as possible. We do have some programs that provide in-kind assistance, so distributing food itself, but our preference is to give people cash and have them decide how to spend it, understanding that every family knows best what their family needs. So we do this because Guatemala has some of the highest rates of malnutrition in the world, actually, and that was surprising to me, and it might be surprising to other people because Latin America is not where we think malnutrition is that common, but for a number of reasons, Guatemala has up to 70% of children under 5 who have chronic malnutrition or stunting, which means that their physical growth is stunted, but also their intellectual growth. So it's really, really damaging for the country as a whole, and of course for the children who are impacted, and just very sad because it's completely avoidable. So it really inhibits their ability to fulfill their dreams and fulfill their potential because they don't have enough nutrition in their early years. So a lot of our work focuses on that age range. Before 2 is a critical time, and then before 5. Those children we try to reach through providing cash to their families, and providing meals at school. So one of our big programs is what's called a Food for Education program. It's funded by the Department of Agriculture from the US, and it provides food for schools in certain parts of the country. We as CRS, we work in one department in Guatemala, and we're able to provide a meal every single day for children in all the schools that we work in, which is over 400 schools. Wow. So it's a significant contribution and really a really interesting program.
Well, and I think it's important for people to understand is not only does that food give the kids nutrition to help them learn, but it also gets them to school because that may be the only real meal they have all day. So it's
That's correct.
It's a carrot to get them to come to school, right?
Yes, it's true. It's true. It's both. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's true everywhere, including in the US. And that's a reason to go to school, is to be able to have a meal. And the really interesting thing that I want to mention that's I think interesting perhaps for people in Wisconsin is that part of this program is linking to what has been established in Guatemala as the National School Feeding Law, which CRS had the privilege to be able to be a part of supporting the passage of this law in 2017. And what it requires is that it requires the government to spend a certain amount of money per student per day on food, which it increased it significantly from what it was before. And it also requires, and I think this connects to the first area that I mentioned that we work on, it requires that a certain % of that food come from local producers. And so some of the food comes from in-kind contributions that we get as CRS from the US as part of this program, but a part of the food that we distribute is from local producers, which it's one of my most it's one of the achievements that CRS contributed to that I'm most excited about whenever I speak about our work, because it connects to issues that are so important in Guatemala. One is lack of access to markets to sell their food for local producers, and lack of nutritious food for children. And so it's this perfect opportunity. And of course, it creates a huge market for these small producers because there are so many schools that need this local produce. So, so we're lucky enough to be a part of that project and that process, and continuing to work to improve it. But I think it's exciting because it's something that I think is a really interesting law that even in the US could be really exciting if something like that existed to help our small farmers. But yeah, so that's one of our biggest programs actually, is this education program.
One of the things that Operation Rice Bowl includes are stories of hope, and they feature little stories about people in different parts of the world. Is there a story of hope that you kind of have come upon or have experienced, like an individual situation?
And I think this individual may be highlighted in this year's Rice Bowl.
Oh, okay.
I'm pretty sure that we invited the CRS team to come document his story, and so I remember him too because he's very memorable. So he is a smallholder producer. His name is Raul. He has a pretty large, I visited his farm. It's pretty significant actually. I mean, he's small, but it's not tiny. And he provides food to schools. And so he's one of these small producers that we've been able to work with to help him improve his practices and produce higher quality and more food in his farm. And also we've helped him link to local schools where he provides his food for schools to use and provide as part of the daily meal. And I think what's exciting about his story is that he started as an individual producer, but because the demand from schools is significant, I mean, it's an opportunity, but it's also a challenge because schools need a certain amount of food, every day. They can't, so they need a certain consistency, and it takes quite a bit of organization on the part of the producer to make sure he or she has enough to give the school what they need for the meals that they're going to prepare for that week or that month or what have you. And so what he's been able to do is connect with other producers, and he hires some of them. So he's created jobs for other producers around him, and he's also purchased from others who have their own farms to be able to support the schools that he supports. So he's been kind of a catalyst for economic growth in his community. So that's
cool. Great.
Well,
if that is one of the stories of hope, I will include it in the email that this conversation is sent to folks with. I don't remember. I looked at some of them, but I don't remember exactly. Guatemala has a very tragic history, 40 years or 50 years of civil war or whatever. How much of that still permeates life there and even affects what you all do in Guatemala?
Yeah.
It's history.
Right. I was surprised when I arrived here how little it is spoken about at this point. It wasn't that long ago that the peace accords were signed. Not that long ago, such that many people that we work with were alive. Of course, most people actually were alive, and they perhaps even were, an adult at the time that it was signed, and yet it doesn't form a huge part of what people talk about when we're working, I guess, in development. It hasn't come up. It does not come up much. And I think that's because the country is still in a process of healing from that tremendous trauma that was, as you mentioned, was 5 generations of people who lived through that, and so it meant that it's going to take a long time for that to be healed. And what I do see as there are many consequences, of course, of that tragic history, but one of them is that there continues to be relatively high rates of within families and violence within families and within communities. I think it seems counterintuitive often, right? That if you experience violence, then you commit violence, but we know that's true. If you experience violence, you're more likely to commit violence as well. And that has played out in many parts of the country that were most impacted by the Civil War or the internal conflict. And so violence against women is quite common, violence against children is common, and just generally a difficulty resolving conflicts without resorting to violence. And so part of what CRS has worked on over the last several years at a regional level, actually, because of course the civil conflict is a regional phenomenon in Latin America, is what we call our peace building platform, which really looks to leverage the prophetic voice of the church actually for peace. And so what we do is we work with church actors. It can be diocesan, parishes, Caritas, sometimes it's orders, certain orders, religious orders. And we work with them to adopt different methodologies that promote peace at the family level, at the community level, with young people, with children. And so we've done that in Guatemala. We've done that through a number of different programs. One of my favorites is a program for women who've experienced violence. It's called Woman, You're Not Alone. And it's a self-help group methodology. So women meet and they go through a series of exercises. And I can say that I personally went through a workshop and I felt like it was intense and powerful and transformative for me. And that to me spoke to how much it must mean for many of the women who don't have access to, go to personal development workshops, which I might be able to do, but can be a part of these self-help groups. So yeah, it's definitely still plays out, and even though it's not spoken of much, at least in my experience.
Guatemala did, though, to the credit of their leadership, they had a huge reconciliation process that unfolded. It was a rather public process, I think, back in the mid-90s, maybe. Something about that, something around that time. But again, violence begets violence, as you say. That's an ongoing thing to be struggling with. The other thing is, there are several Americans who were martyred in Guatemala. Are you aware of Brother James Miller, who was from the Stevens Point area? He was martyred Blessed James Miller, martyred at Huehuetenango, and Blessed Stanley Rother, martyred at Santiago Atitlan. So it's the blood of of Americans are in the soil of Guatemala too. Those martyrs.
Yeah, I actually just visited Santiago Atitlan for the first time this last summer, and we went to the places where he was martyred, and it was really powerful. We had a little someone from the community giving us a little tour of the city, and it was really powerful because I asked. There was a lot of commemoration of him there, actually, several places where they commemorate him. And I asked, is it interesting to you that even though many people from the town died, there's a lot of commemoration for this one person? And he said, no, we feel like for someone to come here from a foreign country and to die for us is so, makes me, it was very powerful for him.
Yeah, I think they see him as maybe representing all those other people who lost their lives as well. I mean, just the story of his martyrdom and stuff is just bone chilling. I mean, it's just incredible. Some of our parishioners have gone on pilgrimage there. We went to Huehuetenango. We went to Huehuetenango for the beatification of Blessed James Miller, and then we also went to San Lucas Toliman, which is just across Lake Atitlan, and visited the mission there in Santiago Atitlan. And so a few of us have some familiarity with Guatemala.
Wow, yeah, that's great.
And then, of course, I was just going to point out too, because you're talking about stability. The programming you're talking about is creating more stable existences for the folks, which also then could potentially limit migration out of Guatemala to the United States or wherever. I mean, our goal, the hope is for people to have a life-sustaining situation in Guatemala, right? So.
Definitely. And actually that when we started this call and I had a background, it's because we just presented recently a study we did on migration, which was precisely looking at that question is what we call it rootedness, like what helps people stay rooted in their communities? Because what we know is that most people want to stay. If they're given the chance, they want to stay in their communities. They feel really connected to their communities.
Nicole, why would they want to come to Wisconsin where it's winter half the year, right?
I know Guatemala has beautiful weather. Yeah, it's so clear whenever we've done 2 studies now, specifically looking at this question of migration, and in both of them, it's abundantly clear that over 70% of families say we want to stay. We love our home, we love our community, we want to be close to our family. It's so strong here in Guatemala, the family ties, that the reason people leave is precisely the impacts of that internal conflict have left economic growth and opportunity in communities so limited that people often feel that it's, no matter what they do, even if they get an education, even if they, try to do their best in whatever work that's available for them, that they're never going to be able to provide what they want to be able to provide for their families. And so creating those structures and stability, as you said, that helps people find those opportunities or see opportunity in their community is so important. And that's why we say that, our belief is that people have the right to migrate. The church believes people have right to migrate, but people have the right to stay too. And if they want to stay, they should be able to stay in conditions that are dignified. And that's where sometimes we come across challenges of people not finding those dignified conditions in their home.
Right. Well, yes, exactly. So just a personal question. What do you see as a future for you? Would you like to stay with CRS? Do you stay in Guatemala for a certain amount of time, or how does that work with CRS in terms of where you're located?
Yeah, we have mission time limits. Okay. So the end of my time in Guatemala is coming soon, too soon. It's next summer 2024. And so I will be looking for a new position and will apply, see what's available when I'm looking. And I think, I really enjoy living abroad. I have to say that I was just sharing this with a colleague in the car this week when we were traveling to the field, that there's something really humbling about being in a new situation where you really don't know anything. You have to say, I really don't know anything about this place. I'm just arriving and I have so much I need to learn. It's a challenge. It challenges you mentally, but it's also an opportunity to say, teach me, I'm here to learn from you. And that is just such a privilege to have that, Sure. I love that about this work.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Nicole, it's just been great to talk with you and just so appreciative of the important work you do. I say to people on Ash Wednesday when we give out the rice bowls that the second most important thing U.S. Catholics do, second only to celebrating the Eucharist, is support Catholic Relief Services because you make the gospel come to life in very important and diverse ways around the world. And so my gratitude to you, and I hope on behalf of our parish as well. And we show that gratitude best, don't we, Nicole, by being generous in our rice bowl campaign. And so if folks who are watching this who haven't gotten their rice bowls, there are baskets of them in our gathering space, and we still have some days of Lent left to collect for Catholic Relief Services. So Nicole, thank you very much. If you're back in Wisconsin sometime, stop in and say hello.
I certainly will. I'll be back in next month, actually.
And we'll warm it up for you by then, okay? We'll try.
All right. Thank you.